My uncle stood up at Thanksgiving dinner, tapped his glass, smiled at the whole table, and said my name in a sentence that ended with the words, "Has been lying to this family for years." Every fork stopped moving at the same time. 23 people, one long table, and my uncle looking at me with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been waiting a long time to say something and has finally found the right audience for it. My name is Callum Reyes. I was 27 years old, and that Thanksgiving dinner was the night my life split into a before and an after so clean you could see the cut. But the story doesn't start there. It starts 8 months earlier in a coffee shop with a man who was reading the wrong book. I should explain what I mean by the wrong book. There is a coffee shop 3 blocks from the architecture firm where I work, a small, unpretentious place that has excellent espresso and a back corner table that gets morning light from a skylight for exactly 2 hours, from 8 to 10, and which I had claimed as my consistent working spot every morning for nearly 2 years. I am a creature of specific habits. The table, the light, the same order every day, the same general arrangement of laptop and notebook, and the particular silence I needed to start working properly. The book was wrong because the man reading it was holding it upside down. Not metaphorically, literally upside down. He had it open and he was staring at it with the focused expression of someone actively reading, and the cover, which I could see clearly from where I stood waiting for my order, was rotated a full 180 degrees from the correct orientation. Either he read upside down by preference, which, having met him, I would not entirely rule out, or he had picked it up without looking and hadn't noticed yet. I said, without particularly deciding to, "Your book is upside down." He looked up, and then I had the experience that I imagine everyone who has ever met Jonah Park has had, the slight adjustment your brain makes when it encounters a face that is more than what you were prepared for. Not conventionally perfect, not arranged for approval, but the kind of face that is entirely itself, with dark eyes that had a quality of directness in them that felt like a question you hadn't been asked yet. He looked at the book, then back at me. "I know," he said. "You're reading it upside down on purpose." "I'm not reading it," he said. "I'm thinking the book is just something to hold." I stood there for a moment. My order arrived. I went to my table. 15 minutes later, he sat down across from me, right side up, book now under his arm, and said, "What are you working on?" That was how it started. Jonah Park was a structural engineer at a firm 4 blocks from mine, which meant we had overlapping professional universes that had somehow never intersected until a skylight table and an upside-down book. He was 29, meticulous in his work and genuinely chaotic in everything else. The kind of person whose desk you could not look at directly and whose mind, when he started talking about something that interested him, produced connections and observations at a rate that required your full attention to follow. He was funny in the dry, understated way that sneaks up on you. You'd be in the middle of a normal sentence, and something he said would land quietly, and you'd find yourself laughing before you'd processed why. We fell into a routine immediately and without discussion, the way some things do when they're right. Coffee at 8, the same table, sometimes working in parallel silence and sometimes talking until one of us had to leave for a meeting. Then lunch occasionally, the deli 2 blocks over, then dinner sometimes, then the kind of Thursday evening walks along the river path that have no purpose except the walking and the talking, which turn out to be purpose enough. I knew by October that I was in trouble. Not the anxious kind of trouble. The kind that settles in quietly and makes itself at home and refuses to be reasoned away. The kind that announces itself in small, relentless ways. The specific awareness of where he is in a room, the involuntary attention to his voice when he's talking to someone else, the way a Thursday that doesn't have him in it feels subtly incomplete. I had been in trouble like this exactly once before, at 22, with someone who had not felt the same way, and I had learned from that experience to recognize the symptoms early and handle them carefully. Handling them carefully, in this case, meant not saying anything. Jonah was my closest friend. I was not going to destabilize that on the basis of feelings I wasn't even certain were legible to anyone outside my own chest. I was going to be an adult about it. I was going to be mature and patient, and I was going to wait until I understood what I was feeling well enough to know what to do with it. I was managing this competently for about 3 weeks. Then he showed up at my apartment one Thursday evening in November with takeout and the very specific expression of someone who has something they've been carrying for a while and has decided tonight is the night they put it down. "Can I tell you something?" he said before he'd fully come through the door. "You're at my door with food. You can tell me anything." He came in. He set the food on my kitchen counter. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets, which was something he did when he was uncertain, keeping his hands occupied so they didn't do anything he hadn't decided on yet. "I've been offered a position in Seoul," he said. "At a firm there, it's a 2-year contract. It's a significant opportunity." The air changed. Not dramatically, just the way air changes when something has shifted that you can't unshift. "When did you find out?" I said. 3 weeks ago." I looked at him. "You've known for 3 weeks." "I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks," he said. "Whether to go, whether—" He stopped. "There are things here I would be leaving, and I needed to think about whether the things here outweigh. And—" He looked at me directly. "I turned it down today." The pause that followed was full. I didn't know what to say, partly because I didn't fully understand yet what the telling meant, whether it was information or an offering, whether he was saying I decided or whether he was saying something harder and more specific than that. "Why?" I said carefully. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "I think you know why." I thought I did. But I also thought I might be wrong, and being wrong about this would cost more than anything else I could imagine. So I said nothing, and the moment held itself in the air between us, and neither of us moved to resolve it. And then his phone rang. Work, something urgent, a project issue that required his immediate attention. And he answered it and stepped outside, and when he came back he was already in problem-solving mode. The moment folded away. And we ate takeout and talked about the project, and the evening passed into a normal shape. But I lay awake that night thinking about the phrase, "I think you know why," and what I would have said if his phone hadn't rung. I need to tell you about my family now, because without my family, none of what happened at Thanksgiving makes sense. The Ray's family is large and loud and deeply, specifically Catholic in the cultural sense that means church at Christmas and Easter, and whenever someone dies, and grace before meals, and a general orientation toward tradition that functions more like an aesthetic than a theology. My mother is warm and practical, and has always operated on the assumption that love means involvement, which manifests as an awareness of every detail of her children's lives that can feel like care, and occasionally like surveillance depending on the day. My father is quieter, steadier, the kind of man who expresses affection through practical action. Fixing things in your apartment, arriving with groceries when you mention you're busy, never quite saying the thing but doing it instead. My Uncle Dominic is my father's younger brother. He is the kind of person who arrived at his personality sometime in his 20s and has not updated it since, confident in a way that does not require evidence, opinionated in a way that does not require information, and operating under the consistent impression that the family's attention belongs to him by right. He has always had a particular interest in me, by which I mean a particular interest in the areas of my life I had not opened for discussion. I had not come out to my family. That is the simple version of it. The more complete version is, I had spent years building a life that was entirely mine. My work, my friendships, my apartment, the person I was in all of those spaces, while maintaining at family gatherings. A version of myself that was reduced by omission. Not lying, precisely, just not volunteering. I told myself it was privacy. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was fear, and I knew it was fear, and I had not yet found the moment that felt worth the cost of saying the true thing. That moment, as it turned out, was not going to be my choice. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house. I arrived with a bottle of wine and the moderate dread of someone who genuinely loves their family and finds large gatherings of them exhausting. And I found my usual position, kitchen adjacent, useful but not central, talking to my cousin about her job and my aunt about her garden, and managing the general orchestration of being present without being exposed. Jonah was with his own family in New Jersey. We had texted that morning. He'd sent a picture of his mother's table, already completely set at 8 a.m., with the caption she started setting it last night, and I had sent back mine started the grocery list in October, and the exchange had the easy warmth that our texts always had, the shorthand of two people who had learned each other well enough to be quick. Dinner was served. 23 people arranged along two extended tables, the good china out, the particular noise of a large family eating together, overlapping conversations and someone's kid demanding something, and the specific acoustic texture of Thanksgiving, which is one of the most recognizable sounds in existence. My Uncle Dominic stood up. He tapped his glass. He said he wanted to say something. My mother smiled because she assumed it was a toast. My father looked mildly wary because he knew his brother better than that. Dominic said he'd been thinking about family values, about honesty, about how this family had always been a place where truth was honored. And then he looked at me down the length of the table and said my name and the words that followed it, has been lying to this family for years. And the silence that fell was the total, absolute silence of 23 people who have all stopped breathing at the same moment. Callum has a boyfriend, Dominic said, pleasantly, into that silence. Has had, from what I understand, various relationships over the years that he's chosen not to mention. I thought, as a family that values honesty, that it was time we talked about it. He sat down, he picked up his fork, he took a bite of turkey. I sat very still. My mother was looking at me. My father was looking at his brother. My cousin, who knew, had gone pale. The rest of the table was in the particular suspended animation of people waiting to understand what they were supposed to feel. And I felt, in that moment, something I had not expected to feel. Not shame. Not the flood of exposure and vulnerability I'd been afraid of for years. I felt something cold and clear and very, very specific. Something that would, in the months ahead, turn out to be the most useful thing I'd ever felt. I felt decided. I set down my fork. I looked at my uncle, who was eating his turkey with the performance of someone who had said a neutral thing. And I said, very calmly, "Yes, you're right, I'm gay. I've been gay for my entire life. I didn't tell this family because it's my information to share on my terms, not because I was ashamed of it." I looked around the table at my mother, my father, my aunts and uncles and cousins and their children. "I'm sorry you found out this way. You deserved better than this. I'll answer any questions you have, but not tonight. Tonight I'm going to finish dinner." I picked up my fork. The silence held for another 3 seconds. Then my cousin reached over and put her hand on my arm. Then my mother said, in her firmest voice, "Dominic, you will not speak again at this table tonight." And the table slowly unfroze and conversations resumed, different now, rearranged around what had just happened, but moving forward. Dominic ate his turkey. He looked like a man who had gotten exactly what he wanted. He had not. I drove home that night in a state I can only describe as the inside of a thunderstorm. Not crying, I didn't cry, which surprised me, but electric, overstimulated. Every thought arriving at full volume simultaneously. I had not planned this. I had not chosen this moment. My uncle had taken the choice from me, and I had handled it. And now I was alone in my car driving home at 9 p.m. on Thanksgiving, and my phone was already going texts from my cousin, from my aunt, from 2 of my cousins I barely knew, all variations of "I love you" and "Are you okay?" and "Call me." And I couldn't look at any of them because I needed both hands on the wheel and all of my attention on staying in my lane. I got home. I sat in my parked car for a while. Then I went upstairs and sat on my couch and looked at my phone and saw, at the bottom of the stack of messages, one from Jonah. It said, "How was dinner?" It was a statement, not a question. He forgot the question mark sometimes. I had always found it endearing in a way I had tried very hard not to think about too specifically. I called him. He answered immediately. "Hey, everything okay?" "My uncle outed me at the dinner table to the entire family," I said. The pause was very brief. "I'm coming over." "Jonah, it's Thanksgiving, you're in New Jersey." "I'm coming over," he said again. Same tone, not asking. He showed up at 11:30. He had driven an hour and 40 minutes. He had a gas station coffee in each hand because he'd stopped on the way, and he handed one to me without ceremony and sat down on my couch and said, "Tell me everything." So I told him everything. The speech, the silence, my mother's voice, my uncle's face, the drive home. He listened without interrupting, without performing shock or sympathy, just fully present and absorbing, the way he always was. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like a thunderstorm," I said. He nodded like that made complete sense. "Okay." He settled back into the couch. "Then we'll wait for it to pass." We sat there. We didn't watch anything. We didn't do anything. He was just there, which was the specific thing I needed, which he had understood without being told. Around 1 in the morning, I said, "You drove an hour and 40 minutes. "Hour 35, he said. "Light traffic." "On Thanksgiving." "Yes." "Why?" I said. He looked at me sideways. "Because you called." The thunderstorm inside me shifted into something else, something warmer and more specific and deeply inconvenient. I looked at the wall. He looked at the wall. The apartment was quiet. "You should sleep here," I said. "It's too late to drive back." "I was going to regardless," he said. He slept on my couch. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and felt many things at once and said none of them into the dark. The fallout was complex and gradual and mostly kind, which was not what I had expected. My mother called the next morning. She was composed and direct in the way she was always composed and direct when she was managing something difficult, and she said, "I wish you had felt able to tell me." I said, "I know." She said, "I want to understand better. Can we talk this week?" I said, "Yes." And we did, a long, careful, genuinely difficult conversation at her kitchen table with tea that neither of us drank, which covered a lot of ground and resolved nothing overnight, but opened something that had been closed. My father called 2 days later. He said, in his way, "I fixed the light in your bathroom last time I was there. I know it keeps going out. Let me know if it starts again." And then, before hanging up, "You're my son. That doesn't change." That was the entire extent of it, and it was exactly enough. My uncle did not call. My uncle, I learned from my cousin, was confused about why his intervention had not been received as the generous act of clarity he had framed it as in his own mind. He had expected, I think, for the revelation to either cause damage that he could observe with satisfaction, or for my family to respond in ways that confirmed his own worldview. Instead, my mother had frozen him out with the particular cold efficiency that she reserved for people who had crossed a line with her children. And my father was not speaking to him beyond necessity. And the family in general had oriented itself around me rather than against me. And Dominic was discovering that moral authority is harder to claim than he'd anticipated. I was not thinking about Dominic very much. I had decided, in the car on Thanksgiving night, that he did not get to live in my head. That was the decision I had made, and I held to it. What I was thinking about was what came next. My life had rearranged itself. The thing I had been carrying quietly for years had been put down in a crowded room, and everyone had seen it, and the world had not ended. In fact, in many ways it had opened. I felt lighter in a way that I hadn't anticipated, not happy exactly, not immediately, but lighter. Like something I hadn't known I was holding had been set down. And now I kept coming back to a kitchen doorway in November, a man with his hands in his pockets saying, "I think you know why." December arrived cold and bright. Jonah and I continued our routine, coffee, walks, dinners, the accumulated comfortable architecture of a close friendship. But something had shifted, or rather something that had always been present had become louder. I was aware of him differently. Not more than before, that would have been impossible, but differently. Like a song you've always heard through a wall, and then someone opens the door and you realize you've been hearing only part of it. He knew about my family now. I had always been honest with him about who I was. I had never been anything but myself around Jonah, which was one of the things that made him exceptional to me. But there was a difference between him knowing abstractly and him knowing the way he knew now, having driven an hour and 40 minutes on Thanksgiving and sat on my couch until 1 in the morning waiting for a thunderstorm to pass. We didn't talk about it directly. We were both, I think, doing the same thing, circling the thing, understanding its shape before reaching for it. There was a quality of heightened attention between us that December, a mutual awareness, the kind that has its own particular texture. Every conversation slightly more charged, every moment of eye contact lasting a beat longer than necessary, the accidental physical proximity of two people in a coffee shop corner booth that neither of them moves to resolve. One evening we were at my apartment, and he was looking at something on his laptop, and I was reading, and the room was quiet and easy, and I looked up and found him already looking at me, and neither of us looked away for a long moment, just held it. And something passed between us that had no words because words would have been insufficient, and also because neither of us was quite ready. He looked back at his screen. I looked back at my book. Neither of us mentioned it. The situation with my uncle clarified itself in January, which is when I found out what he had actually been after. My cousin called me, the one who had known, who had put her hand on my arm at dinner. She told me that Dominic had been, for over a year, quietly lobbying within the family around a business matter, a piece of property our grandfather had left that was in a complicated shared arrangement, and that Dominic had wanted fully transferred to his control. My father had been the obstacle. And Dominic, who operated with the low strategic cunning of someone who has mistaken manipulation for intelligence, had apparently calculated that destabilizing the family's attention around me would give him an opening. He thought, my cousin said carefully, that if the family was dealing with something emotionally big, your situation, your dad would be distracted, off balance, easier to move on the property thing. I sat with that for a moment, the specific quality of it. The fact that I had been a chess piece in my uncle's maneuver, that my most private information had been weaponized in a real estate dispute, that the thing he had done to me at that table had been calculated and intentional, and had nothing whatsoever to do with the family honesty he had dressed it in. "Does my dad know?" I said. "He found out last week," she said. He's very calm, which is how you know he's not calm at all." I understood exactly what she meant. My father's stillness was not peace. It was the kind of stillness that precedes something measured and permanent and considerably more effective than anger. I thought about what I wanted to do with this information. I thought about it for a week, careful, specific thinking, not impulsive. And then I did several things. First, I spoke to a property attorney. Not because I wanted the property, I had no stake in it, but because I wanted to understand exactly what Dominic had been trying to do and what the family's options were. The attorney was helpful, and the picture that emerged was clear. Dominic had been misrepresenting certain terms of the inheritance to various family members in order to build support for his position. This was not, as it turned out, a minor creative interpretation. It was something that, if documented, created real legal exposure for him. Second, I had a long conversation with my father. He listened. He asked precise questions. He said nothing emotional because he never did, but at the end he put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, brief, firm, the full weight of his feeling expressed in that single gesture, and then he made some calls of his own. Third, and most satisfying in the long run, I let my family do what my family does when one of its members has been genuinely wronged. They reorganized. Quietly, without drama, without any Thanksgiving speech. The property matter was reviewed by a family attorney. Dominic's misrepresentations were documented. He did not get what he wanted. He got, instead, the specific experience of being an outsider in the family he had tried to use, which was the consequence most precisely fitted to what he had done. He called me once, in February. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. I said pleasantly, "Of course not," and meant it in the specific way that means, "I have already handled this and I have nothing left to feel about you." He seemed confused. That was fine. But the real story, the one underneath all of this, the one that mattered most, was happening simultaneously and separately, and coming to a head in its own time. It happened on a Wednesday in February, not a significant day, no occasion. I was at the coffee shop early, already at the table, when Jonah arrived and he looked different. Not in any visible way, same coat, same bag, same face that I had been cataloging involuntarily for 9 months. Different in the way people look when they have made a decision, and the decision is sitting on them visibly. He sat down. He did not order coffee. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at me and said, "I need to say something, and I need to say it without getting interrupted." "Okay," I said. "I've been thinking about how to say this for a long time," he said. "I had a whole thing worked out, and now I'm here and I can't remember any of it." He paused. "So I'm just going to say the true version." "Okay," I said again. "I've been in love with you since approximately the 3rd week I knew you," he said. "I think maybe earlier than that, but the 3rd week is when I noticed. I didn't say anything because I wasn't certain what you felt, and because I didn't want to lose what we had by reaching for something you didn't want. And then I was offered Soul, and I turned it down, and I almost said something that night, but the timing was wrong, and then Thanksgiving happened, and I needed to give you space to." He stopped. Collected himself. "I'm done waiting for the timing to be right, because I think what's happening is that I keep finding reasons to wait, and the reason I keep finding them is that I'm scared, and I would rather be scared and honest than comfortable and silent." He held my gaze. "That's it. That's what I needed to say." The coffee shop was doing its morning thing around us. The skylight was doing its 2-hour light thing. Everything was ordinary and nothing was. "The 3rd week," I said. "Give or take." "You turned down Soul." "Yes." "For me," I said. "You turned down Soul for me and then you didn't say anything." "I was building up to it," he said, with a dignity that did not entirely survive the sentence. I looked at him across the table. This person who read the last page first and held his coffee with both hands and drove an hour and 40 minutes at 11 p.m. because I called and sat on my couch until the thunderstorm passed without being asked to. This person who had been my closest friend for 9 months and whom I had spent 9 months not saying the thing I was about to say. "I've been in love with you," I said, "since the upside-down book." He stared at me. "First day," I said. "First conversation. I thought I was managing it very responsibly." "You were," he stopped, "this entire time." This entire time. The pause that followed was not uncomfortable. It was full in the way that very good moments are full, saturated, pressing gently at its own edges, wanting to be more than a moment, but content to be one first. He reached across the table. His hand covered mine on the tabletop, warm, steady, certain. I turned my palm up. His fingers closed. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," I said. The skylight did its 2-hour thing above us. The coffee shop continued. And we sat there in the morning light, holding on to something that had been real for a long time, and was now, finally, entirely itself. Spring came. The city does something particular in spring that I had always appreciated from a professional distance. As an architect, I understood the design of it, the way longer light and warmer air change how people use public space, how plazas fill up and sidewalks become social. But that year I felt it differently. Personally. The way you feel things when your life has changed shape and the change fits. Jonah and I moved through the ordinary stages of a new relationship that was not actually new at all. The first time we said it properly, out loud, with intention rather than as a response. The first time I met his parents, his mother in her immaculate kitchen with a table set for 4 at 2 p.m. The gradual, comfortable convergence of our lives that happens when two people stop maintaining the pretense of living separately when they're mostly together. My mother met him in March. She had been asking about him since January, not intrusively, but with the consistent maternal awareness of someone who had noticed a name appearing with notable frequency in her son's sentences. I brought him to dinner. She asked him about his work with genuine interest, and he answered with genuine detail, and they got into a 20-minute conversation about structural engineering that I had not anticipated and could not have stopped if I'd tried. In the car afterward, he said, "She's wonderful." "She's a lot," I said. "Yes," he agreed, "wonderfully." My father shook his hand when they met, and then spent 40 minutes asking him about a structural issue with a wall in the family home that had been puzzling him for years. Jonah diagnosed it in 10 minutes and drew a sketch on a napkin, and my father kept the napkin, which I know because I saw it on his workbench 3 months later. My uncle came to Easter dinner. My mother had not uninvited him. She did not operate by exclusion, which was both her strength and occasionally her limitation. But the temperature around him had changed permanently. He sat at the far end of the table. He was cordial in the careful way of someone who has understood that the ground beneath him is different now. Jonah was at Easter dinner. I had not planned to bring him, it was early, and I wasn't certain it was the right moment, but he had said, the week before, "Do you want company?" And I had said yes before I'd thought about it, which told me everything I needed to know about what I wanted. He sat next to me. He talked to my cousins and charmed my aunts and navigated my large, loud, complicated family with the same grounded attention he brought to everything. At some point during dinner, I looked over at him. He was laughing at something my cousin had said, the real laugh, the unguarded one, and I felt something so uncomplicated and so complete that I had to look away for a moment and just hold it. Dominic looked at us once across the table. His expression was difficult to read, not hostile, exactly, more like a man recalculating. I looked back at him steadily. Not with anger, I had put the anger down weeks ago, just steadily. The look of someone who knows exactly where they stand. He looked away first. In May, the property matter was formally resolved. The family attorney had reviewed everything, and Dominic's misrepresentations had been documented and addressed. He did not receive what he had wanted. The arrangement remained as my grandfather had left it. Dominic signed what he needed to sign with the particular quietness of a man who has realized that the people he underestimated were paying better attention than he thought. I had no interest in celebrating this. It wasn't a victory to me, it was a correction, the restoration of something to its right shape. My father handled the legal side with the efficient quietness that characterized everything he did, and when it was done, he called me and said, "It's settled." And then, "Your grandmother would have liked Jonah. She liked people who paid attention." That was the highest compliment my father had in his vocabulary. I said I thought so too. There is a moment I keep coming back to. Not the coffee shop, not the Thanksgiving table, not the Easter dinner or the property resolution. A moment that happened in June, ordinary in every external way, which is why it stays with me. We were walking back from a film, a long film, the kind that leaves you slightly outside yourself when it ends, processing, the world looking different in the way it does after 2 hours of being somewhere else entirely. It was warm. The streets were that June version of alive, people outside, noise, the particular energy of a city that has remembered its summer. We were walking and not talking, the comfortable silence we had always had, and that had a different quality now, fuller somehow, the silence of two people who are completely at ease. He reached over and took my hand, not dramatically, just took it, the way you do something you've been doing for a long time, and we kept walking and the city did its summer thing around us. I thought about Thanksgiving, about my uncle standing up and the forks stopping and the silence. I had spent years afraid of something like that moment, the exposure, the loss of control, the thing being known before I chose to share it. And when it happened, what I had felt was not the thing I was afraid of. What I had felt was decided. What I had felt was the cold clarity of someone who had been pushed and had discovered in the push that they did not fall. And here, on the other side of it, walking through a warm June city with my hand in Jonah's, I understood something about fear that I hadn't understood before. That the thing you're afraid of is almost never the thing that actually happens. The thing that actually happens is almost always more survivable, more navigable, more human than the version you've been protecting yourself against in your imagination. And the cost of the protection is the years you spend managing around something rather than living through it. "What are you thinking about?" Jonah said. "Thanksgiving," I said. He squeezed my hand slightly. "Good version or bad version?" "Good version," I said. "It always ends up being the good version now." He was quiet for a moment. "What made it good?" "You drove an hour and 40 minutes, I said. "Hour 35, he said. "I've mentioned." "You drove an hour and 45, I said, and felt him laugh beside me, the warm, real version. The city continued. The evening moved. Somewhere behind us, my family was rearranging itself into a new shape, slowly, with the imperfect and genuine effort of people who love each other trying to do better. Somewhere, my uncle was living with the specific consequences of his specific choices. And here, on a warm June sidewalk, two people who had been circling the same table for 9 months were walking forward. My mother called in July. She said she'd been talking to her sister about Jonah and that her sister wanted to know if we would come to the family reunion in August. The family reunion had been the event from which I had historically managed my exposure most carefully. The largest gathering, the most variables, the most extended time in which to navigate. Yes, I said, without calculating, without managing. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, good, just that, but it carried everything. At the reunion, Jonah wore a blue shirt that I had not seen before and talked to my extended family with the specific attention he gave everyone, and helped my uncle by marriage fix a screen door without being asked, which won him a loyalty from that corner of the family that persisted for years. My cousin found me at one point in the afternoon, standing at the edge of the yard watching Jonah talk to a group of my aunts with apparent ease. He's good, she said. He is, I said. You're different, she said, not a question. Good different or bad different. She looked at me, like someone who stopped holding their breath. I thought about that, about the years of managed breath, careful breath, the particular practice of breathing in a way that wouldn't show, and how it felt now to just breathe. Yeah, I said, probably that. Dominic was not at the reunion. He had not been invited. That was new. I noticed the absence without satisfaction and without grief. He had made choices, and those choices had outcomes, and the family had, in its quiet, collective way, adjusted accordingly. That was all. That was exactly all. In September, 9 months after Thanksgiving, I stood in my parents' kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, while my mother and Jonah argued cheerfully about the correct proportion of a particular spice in something she was making. Both of them entirely serious. Both of them entirely wrong, in my opinion. And I leaned against the counter and watched and felt something I can only describe as rightness. Not perfection, not the kind of life where everything is resolved and nothing is hard and every conversation ends cleanly. Rightness. The feeling of a life that is actually yours, shaped by your own choices, bearing the weight of real things. My father came in from the garden and looked at the scene, Jonah and my mother, the spice debate, my position against the counter, and he made his coffee and stood beside me for a moment. Good, he said, again just that, again everything. Yeah, I said. He patted my shoulder once and went to his chair in the other room. Through the doorway I could see him settle, pick up his newspaper, do the Sunday thing he always did, the same ritual he had performed every Sunday of my life. Unchanged. Continuous. The reliable fact of a parent in his chair. Some things break and don't come back. And some things, the ones built on something real, on love that isn't conditional on you being a manageable version of yourself, those things absorb the break and keep going. They change shape and they keep going. I had spent years afraid that my family fell into the first category. I was wrong. Blessedly, specifically wrong. October. A year since November. A year since a coffee shop Thursday and hands in pockets, and I think you know why. We were at the same coffee shop. Of course we were. The coffee shop was where we always ended up. The skylight table had become ours in a way that was now acknowledged by the staff who had watched the whole thing develop with the fond attention of people who see a lot of people come and go and know when something is real. Jonah had the right side-up book. He'd stopped reading the last page first, he told me in August, because he'd realized he was doing it with his own life, trying to know the ending before he could be comfortable with the middle, and he was attempting to stop. How's that going? I'd said. Terrifying, he'd said. Better. He was reading correctly now, and I was working, and the morning light was doing the 2-hour skylight thing, and the coffee shop was being the coffee shop, and it was completely ordinary, and it was the best thing I knew. He looked up, found me looking at him, didn't look away. What? He said. Nothing, I said. That's not a nothing face, he said. It's a good face, I said. Everything is what it should be face. He considered this. Those are the same thing, he said, and looked back at his book. I looked back at my work. Outside, the city moved through its October business. Somewhere across town, my family was doing whatever Sunday families do. Somewhere in a house that was getting quieter and more isolated, my uncle was living the specific consequence of having underestimated the people around him. And here, in a corner booth in a coffee shop with a skylight that gave good light from 8 to 10, two people sat in the simple, enormous, ordinary luxury of being exactly where they wanted to be. That, I have learned, is not a small thing. It is the whole thing. It is everything. If this story found you at the right time, if you recognized something in Callum's years of careful breath, or in Jonah's quiet waiting, or in the moment a family reorganizes itself around love instead of expectation, then you already know why stories like this one matter. Drop a comment and tell me what moment got you. Was it the Thanksgiving table, the hour and 45-minute drive, the skylight coffee shop, the Sunday kitchen? I read every single one. Like this if it gave you something real. Subscribe so you're here for what comes next. Because part 2 is coming, and what I haven't told you yet is what Dominic did the following Thanksgiving, what he tried, who he brought with him, and what Jonah said in the middle of it that stopped the entire table cold and changed the dynamic of that family permanently. Should I tell you what happened next?